Hello, everyone, and thanks again for joining us at the 2024 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name is Esteban Calderon, and I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel, Impacting the Game, the Advancement of Sports Analytics with Industry Pioneers, presented by ESPN. Our panelists today are Brian Burke, Sports Data Scientist at ESPN, Dean Oliver, author of Basketball on Paper, and our panel will be moderated by Alison Lux from ESPN. The panel will run for 45 minutes, and we will leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. Please submit your questions via our Cadence app. Without further ado, we're going to kick off with a brief video.
Analytics says green light here up to 4th and 3. It's 4th and 1.
You see the Diamondbacks raise their chances by 14% if they get a win.
The Lakers have a 63% chance to make the play-in tournament.
See, I like analytics when they favor my team.
It's about numbers, trying to find an edge in the market.
It does feel like a ride over at Disneyland.
ESPN Analytics has, 7 teams with better than a 30% chance?
According to BPI, the Celtics are the top team in the NBA.
Their analytics say there's 19% chance they make the tournament.
You're talking about low QBR, lowest that John Payton's ever seen.
I think that presents a lot of value in a draft like this. Let's play into that uncertainty and use it to our advantage.
Thank you very much for joining us. I'm so lucky to be up here with Brian and Dean. I've had the pleasure of working with these two guys over the past decade plus. So really excited about the conversation we're going to have here. Two guys who have just been, pioneers, titans in the industry. And yes, just pumped to dive in. First thing I wanted to chat about, because we're fresh off, the recent NFL playoffs, and I think second to only Taylor Swift was conversation about analytics. You had Dan Campbell, going for it for 4th down multiple times against the 49ers, and then, all the discussion about the Super Bowl overtime, whether to kick or kick or receive in overtime. So kind of out of all that, just the discussion across the board, what are your key takeaways coming out of that discussion? Brian, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, no, being here at Sloan, this might be my 12th, 13th year, I lost count. But between then and now, the change in the way it's accepted throughout the sport and by fans. I mean, fans are sometimes, they're further ahead than some of the coaching staffs in the league, and so they demand sort of analytically inclined solutions and approaches, and the script is really flipped. So 12 years ago, we were kind of banging on the door saying, hey, we think we have some good ideas about what you could do better to help your team win, and now they're kind of banging on our door.
I think it's interesting because the game has changed in terms of how it gets played. Football has, basketball has a lot, but it's not only that has changed. I did an article the other day looking at how voting for All-Star and for All-NBA and all defensive teams, all of these have changed. They're not using the same metrics that they used to use before. They're clearly using the analytical metrics. And I don't know if you see that in football at all.
Yeah, no, I mean, we say, they've always used stats to do that kind of thing. It's just, you might as well use the best ones you can.
Yeah.
Maybe you said that. Don't quote me. You never know with Dean.
I mean, coming out of those two instances in particular, the thing, especially after the NFC Championship game, I had expected, to have a lot of the pundits, whatever, basically dunking on Dan Campbell. It's how could you do this and so forth. But really, it was more tilted the other way, where, a lot of the analysts and former players and everything, that's, this is what the math says. This is how they got to that point. And then similarly with the Super Bowl overtime, people were coming to us and asking, like, hey, like what does the math say here?
Yeah.
As opposed to, just it didn't work, so, therefore it was wrong.
No, it really blew me away. The reaction to the Lions' decisions were, even though they lost, the discussion has become quite sophisticated where they understand, like, process trumps, outcome-based analysis. And they said, no, they did even though they lost, they probably did the right thing. That 2-point play earlier in the year was against Dallas, right?
Yes.
No, but everything else, yeah, good. And the overtime, same way. It was sort of the analytics behind it became authoritative. People just they trusted enough now. We've had a run of success long enough that people kind of trust the analysis. And again, with Shanahan, there was a tremendous amount of criticism for him. The analysis said he probably, at the very least, he didn't do the wrong thing. And there were good reasons, it was about a 50-50 decision, really. So, he wanted to rest his defense, didn't want his defense to have 2 consecutive long drives on the field, which is great. It's the melding, really, it's the melding between analysis and the qualitative side where the coach, where there's something not in the model. Like, the model didn't have your defense just, lost an 80-yard drive, and now you have to go into overtime on 5 minutes of rest. That's not in the model. So I thought that was great. It was great to see.
That's actually would be an interesting thing to put in because you could, right? You could put in something. Have you ever looked at like the impact of defense being on the field? It's like
you could, right? But the model would have to know, like, well, how many minutes,
Yeah, I think it's possible.
Yeah, I'll get on. Oh.
I'm not pushing you to do that.
I'm joking.
So, Dean, talking a lot about how analytics and so forth are covered on the media side. Yeah. You coming off of a few seasons here as a coach with the Wizards, like how ingrained is like the analytics-based decision making within players' minds? Like, are there conversations about like fouling up 3 or 2-for-1s?
Those conversations, those little tactical things, they are done in practice. So the 2-for-1 is legitimately practiced on a regular basis. So we will simulate end of quarter, end of half, end of game kind of stuff. And that is in there. They have a very 35 seconds basically is what you kind of trigger to shoot that shot so that it's there. So in-game is not actually used as much. Like, just a reminder, we're aiming to shoot it then. And a lot of times the players know it. I think one of the things that is not as well recognized right now is that the players have kind of, because of Brian, because of what we've done analytically for a long time, is players have grown up with analytics. They, in some ways, are more aware of it than the coaching staff that got into that profession before analytics was strong. So I think a lot of players, they don't have to hesitate at all when they come down. They understand the 2-for-1. They understand fouling. Actually, fouling up 3 is more controversial because it's not super clear either way. But certainly taking 3s over mid-range stuff, there is some pushback. There are players like Bradley Beal, who we had in Washington. He was a pretty good mid-range shooter, not a great one, but he would push back sometimes because he made a good amount of them. And that is right. It's a rule of thumb that you take less mid-range. But it doesn't mean you take no mid-range. And it also means that if you're good at mid-range, you can take more of those. And so those are some of the educational processes that we have to go through with some of the players and some of the coaches too, for sure.
Was basketball on paper required reading for everybody on the team? Preseason.
That was a long time ago. I got a new book coming out.
Well, we'll give you time to plug that.
Okay.
Plug that in a bit. So, what other in-game analytics have we seen on the rise besides like 4th downs in football and some of these others we talked about in basketball?
Yeah, on the football side, any sort of in-game management question can kind of be answered now. So if you have an in-game win probability model that's good enough, it's got timeouts built in, it knows who's kicking off in the second half, things like that, you can it's like stepping into the matrix, right? You kind of, you have this model of the world, you can ask it really any question and it will, at least give you the first order best answer. Onside kicks, all kinds of clock management stuff. You can help it with like play call. It'll help with play calling. 2-point conversions. Anything that that is an in-game management question can kind of be answered at least to the first order. So there's really no limit.
Football has so many stops and starts that it's much easier to take that time to make those decisions, to carefully run the odds. Basketball doesn't have that as much, so you have kind of these rules of thumb that you do stick to. I mean, the thing when you're losing by 15 and to start the fourth quarter, there has been more of a tendency, let's throw a few more three-point shooters in there, let's see if we can get this deficit down, that kind of thing. Those things are done. A lot of in-game analysis is more the preparation before you get there, rather than the in-game modifications, in basketball at least.
Yeah, I mean, football is sort of this hybrid between kind of discrete state sport, like baseball, it doesn't have a clock, and like a continuous sport, like basketball, which is just kind of this continuous flow. Football obviously has a clock, but it also has discrete, plays. So it's this hybrid, which makes it fun to analyze.
Football has so much, like your starting state is so important in terms of what you're going to do. Basketball, our starting state pretty much every time is the same thing.
You have the ball and the shot clock is it,
like, okay, you get across half court. I mean, there are some situations, very late game, late quarter kind of thing. Oh, you got the ball with 4 seconds to go. You advance, but that sort of stuff was known before analytics.
So, touching back on fourth downs, I'll let Brian elaborate a bit. We at ESPN, first thing that showed up in the sizzle reel was how we've been able to implement fourth down recommendations, I suppose we'll say, on our Monday Night Football broadcasts. And Brian and team it's been a long process to get something out there that was easy to digest for fans. So Brian, you want to walk us through a bit kind of how we've gotten here?
Well, it all started back in 2008. I'll fast forward a little. It's kind of a solved problem, and it has been since then. But only just now is it really penetrating kind of popular consciousness and making it on Monday Night Football. Not only that, but our college broadcasts too. So, we have one pro game a week on TV, but we have, probably dozens of college games on our various channels. So it's really gratifying to see. But getting it on air presented special challenges because of time lag. The play-by-play, this all has to be automated. And the play-by-play will come in lagged, right? The play has to happen, they have to type in the play, we get the data, it gets sent. There's all this lag in the system. So by the time we know what the fourth down situation actually is, and we send the results of the analysis back to the broadcast booth, it's too late. The play has already happened, they might already be in a commercial. So we've come up with some very clever ways to just know ahead of time. As soon as a fresh series of downs starts, we know where any potential fourth and X to go will be. And so we just kind of brute force do all the analysis for any potential fourth down, and it can boil down to a single number that we send. It's 3. We recommend go for it on 3 yards to go or less. And we've really it's that simple at the end of the day, and that really broke through. Once we simplified it, and it was quick enough to make it to the booth, I think that really helped. And the broadcast crews, the producers, the on-air talent, they've started to buy in themselves. So it's gratifying to see. It was a long process. It's been, do the math, 16 years, but it's been worth it.
That's interesting because Jeff Van Gundy, I remember one of his concerns about using any analytics is the time delay, just like you're talking about. And so, yeah, that's a pretty clever solution. For some of the things that we would want to do, we might be able to work that kind of thing too. That's a good idea.
We have a special advantage too because the team, at least in the NFL, are prohibited from using any kind of electronics, where we're not constrained by that. So we can do things that even the teams can't do, which is kind of cool. Yeah.
Have that advantage. So, obviously fourth downs, getting that on Monday Night Football certainly has been a feather in our cap in the analytics space. To each of you, what do you think was kind of like the turning point, with analytics in the media and how it's covered? At some point, because you guys have been in this game for a long time, pushing different things, and at one point you're just like, you know what? We kind of turned the corner. We've made it.
Okay, I will go first on this one. So it is. I remember Billy Packer in the 1990s talking about points per possession, and I don't know where he got it from. It was not long after I did some of my first stuff. I'm like, okay, that was big for me. I don't know if it was big for the public. I don't want to at all underrate the QBR show or whatever we called that at that time. It was blatant. I mean, we're showing off a metric. We're gonna highlight that football does require numbers, and we weren't afraid to do that at the time. And you can go back and look at the show, and you were kind of mentioning it was a little bit stiff, but it was important. People criticized us for it. People praised us a little bit for it, that kind of thing. But it was gutsy to do it. But I think that sizzle reel highlights that it's not one single turning point. You got to keep that conversation going. It's not as though you can I have a dream speech about analytics, and it takes over. You've got to do it over and over and over again and get people used to it.
Yeah, honestly, there were probably several turning points, one of which was when, years before I joined ESPN, they adapted a lot of the things I was doing into QBR. And I thought, wow, okay, if ESPN has confidence in my approach enough to build this metric and promote it and the way they did, I thought that was really validating. But I'll tell you, I don't know about turning point, but the watershed event in football analytics, there's no doubt what that was. And that was November 2009. Right. And it used to be you could bring this up and everybody knew what you're talking about, but some of the people in the room were probably, it was probably past their bedtime. But Bill Belichick goes for it on 4th and 2 in his own territory, up by, I don't remember, just slightly less than a touchdown against Peyton Manning and the Colts. They didn't get it. And I wrote a blog post for my website. They said, actually, that was a really good idea to go for it. Didn't work out, but that was a good idea. Here's some 5th grade arithmetic that proves it. And the New York Times, I was contributing to them at the time, and they said, got an email from them right before I turned in for the night, and they said, mind if we, print this in the paper tomorrow? Well, yeah, sure, of course. Yeah. I went to bed and then woke up the next day and my world had changed. It's like, Brian, hi, this is Peter King from Sports Illustrated. Do you have a minute? And ESPN came to my house and did a big profile on Sunday NFL Countdown the next week, and had my little 15 minutes, but that, I think, broke through. That there's this little community of guys like us with websites and stuff, and there's dozens of us, kind of thing, to breaking through into the popular consciousness. So it wasn't adopted then, and it's not like everything just turned on a dime and everybody became as analytically savvy as they are now, but that was watershed. That's a good one.
Dean, you mentioned Total QBR, and for those who might not be aware, Dean, his many careers. He was the director of analytics at ESPN back 2010, 11,
2011.
12. So yes, he was one of the architects of our Total QBR metric, which lives to this day. Just going back on it and, knowing a lot of the challenges that we faced with QBR coming out of the gate, looking back on it, what do we think has made it, the success that it has become, that it's literally like ubiquitous now across how we, talk about quarterback play?
So let me back up a little bit here. So that QBR thing, so I got to ESPN in, I think, February of 2011, and we knew we were going to work on QBR.
It was the year of the quarterback.
I've got a good plan for how to do this, and I'm working on it pretty diligently, very diligently. My family hadn't moved there yet, so I was working in 14-hour days. And after about a month, the show producer and like, can we get this done for August? And I'm like, what? And so, like, to get all of this done in that period of time, I was super worried that I would end up with something that was substandard. But the plan that I think helps and gets to answering your question is that we created something that was very much play-based. So how you evaluate a quarterback on what happens on essentially every play. We didn't do handoffs at the time, but scrambles, sacks, not just throwing the ball, was an important part of what we wanted to capture, and especially as football has changed and brought in a lot more running quarterbacks, and we've recognized the value of being able to avoid sacks. Jay Cutler, I remember at the time, he would take a ton of sacks. And so I think we got on his case about that and told people that's not in passer rating, that is in QBR. So we were able to capture much more, and I think as the sport and the position of quarterback has gotten more robust, it's had no problem adapting to that.
Yeah, I think I'll add this, that before QBR there was passer rating, and it's still used. And if you ever want a good belly laugh, go look up how passer rating is computed. It's awful. It's just a crime against statistics. It's just so bad in so many ways. Yeah. It double counts completion percentage. So, check down Charlies look good in passer rating. It overweights touchdowns. It does. Sacks aren't part of it. Scrambling isn't part of it. Running, designed runs now, we have a lot more of that, which QBR is sort of visionary, right? We didn't really have a lot of QB sneaks in 2010.
Yep.
Now we've got, Lamar and Josh Allen and Daniel Jones, guys like that, legitimate running threats. So I think the killer aspect of QBR is that it rectified all the horrible awfulness of passer rating.
And it was loosely part of the operation back then. But the whole idea of kind of division of credit, and we had a new wave of tracking data, not next-gen stats, not the chip data, but manually tracked data, but allowed some additional context for the division of credit between the quarterback and mostly receivers, and certainly on the sacks too.
Yeah, that kind of thing's only possible really with the kind of resources that a bigger company has. Like I wouldn't have been able to do that as just an independent analyst, without really starting a company. And the video tracking that we still do today was a big. It's great data. So it was one of the big things, a big draw for me to get to ESPN was I took, the data that was publicly available. I think I've taken this as far as it can go. And I can just kind of be a broken record on, hey, fourth downs, everybody. Or I can go to somewhere with really cool data, formations and, quarterback duress and how many defenders are in the box and all kinds of things that just, at least at the time, were definitely not publicly available. That was awesome. So a lot of the things that came with QBR or enabled QBR allowed us to do a lot of other cool stuff too.
It was a hard project, and I think something that doesn't get stated enough is when you're doing these hard projects, It may take a lot of people, it may take new data, but it's going to take a lot of thinking about how you put all those pieces together. And when we did that, when you did that, for all of these things, they last longer. If you invest that time up front to really think about, I want to be able to handle all of these situations, it's hard. But for like students who want to get in and to do this kind of stuff, those are if you do the hard projects, you can really get a leg up.
And another, talk about different inputs and things, like you guys talk, you talk to a ton of different experts. You talk to former quarterbacks, and obviously at ESPN we have a lot of coaches, and former coaches, quarterbacks, so forth. Just getting kind of their input, their perspective on what types of things they value and look at in a quarterback performance. So it was a comprehensive endeavor, but certainly one that we very much well worth it.
Oh yeah, I'll butt in here. The database is still called Dilfer.
I was wondering.
Dilfer.this, and Trent Dilfer is now the head coach at UAB, and he's got analytics staff. He's very analytics forward thinker now, which is kind of neat to see. Yeah, sorry.
Because originally they were called the Dilfer stats. It was the
Dilfer data team.
Yeah, they were collected before we actually put them into QBR, and so that was part of the thinking is, we're getting these stats. We can put those in. That's really helpful.
So, obviously we like QBR a lot. Dean, if you could get your hands back into QBR again, right now, what do you think you would change? How would you do it differently with all of the data and what you know?
So I know.
Yeah, we had a long text conversation about this.
Did you?
Yeah.
There's. I think part of it is Brian's done a whole lot of work with other tracking aspects too, like receivers and blocking and all of these kind of things. And I think you can start putting a lot of these structures together, for sure. But yeah, you talked about I'll let you suggest what you thought.
Right. So there's a component in there that part of QBR was kind of in a way developing this degree of difficulty.
Yes.
To kind of like in diving, right? And so part of that difficulty was the pass rush, and there's a component there that gives the quarterback extra credit if he is under duress at the time of throw. And that's the one thing I think over the years, it's been 14 years now, almost 14.
Yeah, 13 years at this point.
And we've learned more about quarterback play analytically. And I think at the time it was just starting to shift, where before it was thought that sacks were an offensive line problem, that any sort of sack, no matter how deep into the play it happens, is because the offensive line didn't do its job somehow. And so, that's, I'm exaggerating, that's one extreme end of the spectrum. And then the other end is, quarterbacks invite sacks because they're not making quick reads, they don't have pocket presence, they're not aware of what's going on, they can't maneuver within the pocket, and they're not finding their hot reads, and there's even pre-snap element to it where the quarterback is contributing to the protection calls pre-snap. So the quarterback has much more to do with the sack than we thought at the time.
How do we know that? How can we know that when we're doing QBR though? How can we know we can't do a pre-snap call?
You would need like tracking stuff now to be able to do that. But so the thing is that, okay, the duress is making the throw more difficult for the passer, but it's the Carson Wentz's of the world who are, the Justin Fields of the world who are inviting that.
They were to blame for the duress themselves.
Partially, right?
Yeah, partially,
more than we all believed at the time. Like those, we just hadn't gotten there yet. So that would be the one thing we change, is to somehow modify that, change that modifier.
Coming soon. Maybe. I'm not promising anything for that.
No, Dean asked me, he's like, how hard would that be to do? And it would be like, well, trivially easy to just, delete that part of the code. we make the coefficient 0 or something. But then, one of the problems or challenges at sort of this enterprise level or institutional level with statistics, like at my old website, I could do that overnight. And nobody would care. And I'd write a post about how I changed it and whatever. But now we have 14 years, 13 years of articles and tables and content that's based on this quarterback ranked 8th in QBR. And all of this overnight, if all those numbers change, it would, or Hank, our colleague Hank Arjulo, would have to rerun these. it would take him,
But that was one of the hard things from the beginning on this, is because we could run a QBR the night of and then a QBR the day after. And traditionally, a stat was a stat. It's not going to change except in rare cases. And so I think media having to deal with this question now, analytics, they can change a little bit. And that's not, I think, there's no settled answer for that. But I think you guys have obviously done a pretty good job in dealing with it because it makes all those sizzle reels. Yeah.
That's the sign of success is the sizzle reel for sure. Wanted to get into the player tracking data and mentioned as a possible enhancer to QBR. NFL, Next Gen Stats, certainly NBA has its player tracking data. How has that really opened up the conversation? Working with a team, like how is that, especially in the NBA now too? Like you're starting to get more into like pose data, so like it's getting really, really detailed.
So I'll start kind of 30,000 feet. What's interesting, of course, is so when I wrote basketball on paper, there were player ratings there, and that was based on box score stuff. And then we got play-by-play. And then we got tracking version 1, and now we've tracking version 2. What hasn't changed much is LeBron is a great player no matter what. Like, tracking data is not going to change that kind of thing. It's going to tweak some things. It may get him a little bit higher or a little bit lower because that information gives you a little bit more. And that's what we're trying to do, because there's a lot of guys in the middle, that middle class. That's where some of this tracking data can really, you talk about the no stats all-star Shane Battier thing. What were the little things that he did? Do we know those things very well? If you talk about a player who was a great screener, we had no data for that. And so were we giving them the right credit or not? Now we can do that better. But a highlight here is, I've talked about players. For the most part, the player tracking data doesn't change a lot about the team. It changes a lot about the players. It may give you a sense of style, a better sense of how a team plays, but not how good they are, if that makes sense.
How much does it play into strategy? Like more, you're able to do more extensive scouting reports and,
you can dig into almost any question that a coach asks now. You can dig into play types and how you defend those play types much, much better. You can dig into matchups. Should we put KCP on LeBron, or we should put him on a shooter? Those kind of things. That kind of stuff is there, and you can do that analysis. It doesn't necessarily give you a perfect answer, but it can lead you the right way. You can be part of that conversation. The coaches don't know. And if the data doesn't have a super solid answer, that's fine. You go back to the coach, and they can go with what they feel is right. But that's what it does. You can, Mike Zarin said this yesterday in our panel, that we couldn't have great conversations with coaches originally. Before the tracking data, you could only go so far. Now you can go into incredible depth. The advanced scouting reports that I would do, we could get into so much about pick and roll and how to defend shooters and all of this kind of stuff that was impossible 10 years ago even.
Yeah, on the football side, that's a good way to put it, is that it made the impossible possible. For starters, it just allowed us to do things that humans could do fairly well, but now we can do it at a speed and a scale that could never be done before. So you're just making the lives easier. We replaced a lot of the VAT, the video tracking stuff. We were able to replace a lot of that and just reduce the workload based on those things. We built classifiers for, hey, what coverage is this? What routes are these? What route combinations are these? What's the run play here? So we built just classifiers that then can become foundations for further analysis. So now we say, hey, what was the EPA per play on a dagger concept versus cover 4? It's fairly sophisticated things that you just never would have been able to otherwise. And then you have individual player metrics now that you could do for football, which were seemingly impossible 10 years ago. So the very first thing I did was individual player metrics for line play, right? So I'll never forget being told, I wasn't here at the time, but I think John Gruden, when he was doing Monday Night Football, the analytics team would go to people like Gruden and say, what can we do for you? And he would say, hey, how come there aren't stats for linemen? We need stats for linemen.
I believe he asked for an ERA for O linemen.
Yeah, something like that. Perfect. And you have to say, I'm sorry, coach, we can't do that. It's just impossible. But now it is possible, which is, I think, really, really neat, really compelling. Personally, let me add this. The player tracking data changed everything in the analysis world, and for me personally. So I'm on record. I was here at Sloan on the football panel, and on record saying, this is just going to be a problem. It's just a data storage problem. You're not going to be able to make use of any of this data. Partially because I was intimidated by it. I didn't have the skills to really make use of it. And I didn't understand what we would have to do in order to get there. And, but it was a big challenge. So now I can scratch together a convolutional neural network for you, which I had no clue what those words even meant in 2014. So it was a big challenge for me, and it was very rewarding. And then on the other side, it forces you to also understand the X's and O's of the sport. You really have to understand the way a coach kind of sees the sport. Now, I'm not saying I understand it as well as a coach, but you have to go there. And so the player tracking data is kind of this meld of, if you don't know what quarters coverage is, or cover 3 versus a cover 2, then how can you make your classifier work very well? So you really had to learn I had to learn this stuff at a much deeper level. It gave me a much bigger appreciation for football. Because you can do the game management stuff, the fourth down stuff, win probability chart, whatever. You could be from Mars and never have watched a football game, and you have the play-by-play data, and you could answer all those questions. Once you go to the tracking data, now you really need subject matter expertise at a much deeper level.
The more you know about the sport from the perspective of a coach, the better chance you got. There's just echoing what you said, no doubt.
So, player tracking data being like another frontier that we've crossed in the analytics space. What's kind of the next frontier? Is there anything, do you feel like there's anything along the lines of predicting human behaviors, like motivation, drive, communication?
So I think those are, so I view things, there's 3 things. There's description, there's prediction, and then there's prescription. So prescription is a combination of prediction and being able to change that prediction. And I think that's a big deal to be able to do. Now, we have the player tracking data to do some of that, the tactical stuff. I think when you talk about psychology and motivation and things, a lot of times that would require knowledge about the state of players' psyche. And I'm not saying that's impossible. I'm saying that actually we all kind of do this. We look at people where we try to infer whether they're happy or sad or mad or all of these kind of things. And some people are much better at it than others. But I think that is implicitly some kind of data that's not getting recorded, it's not going into a database, but people use that to try to change those predictions so that you try to there is a chapter in my upcoming book about the power of motivation because I was able to quantify it and how much it changes performance, and it is dramatic. So, and I used just situations where I knew different levels of motivation existed.
It's that, like, you can't measure heart question, but I have been authorized by our CEO and president, Jimmy Pitaro, to make a major announcement here today. We're announcing a heart metric. This is a joke. No, you can't measure heart, but you can use the tracking data to measure some effort metrics and some load metrics and things like that, and especially in practice. Teams, I can tell you, teams on the insides of buildings are using their own tracking technologies to measure load or measure loafs, things like that. So at some level, you can.
Effort is an interesting one because I've seen situations where a player was criticized for not having good effort in a time, but it's what can look like they're not putting in effort can also be confusion. They don't know what they're supposed to do, so they don't do it hard. And I think that is one of the things that actually can be difficult to identify, to determine, is that they may want to do this hard, but they're not actually sure whether they're supposed to be going here or here. And maybe it's not because they weren't told, but it's a read on the floor, and they have a teammate who did something a little bit different. They're going hard over the screen, but they weren't supposed to go hard over the screen. And the other guy is like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
No, I remember this, this story about this Eric Mangini, who was the coach for the Browns and Jets. It came from the Belichick tree, and I just remember reading stories about how he would require his players to kind of memorize, opponent tendencies, like statistically. They're not like, hey, when they're in this formation, they usually run to the right, kind of. But at a percentage level, they run to the right 62% of the time, or something like that. And I thought, man, hey, I'm Mr. Stats, but that's just going to slow the players down. You need the players to play as fast as they can,
yes,
with as little uncertainty as possible, yes. And not like those numbers are for the coaches. That helps the coaches make their coaching decisions, but that's where those numbers need to stop, and the player just needs to play fast.
It was funny. We would when you're preparing your team for a game, you would get together before the game, and a lot of times you'll give them the scouting report, and some of them are really good at looking through it, and they know at least the guys that they're more likely to cover and stuff. Other people, I don't know this, and before they get called on by a coach, okay, I got to pick this up, and they will quote a number on there to make it sound like they know what they're talking about. They will say, oh yeah, he shoots 44% from three, but they didn't actually know what position he played or anything like that.
So, Brian, you currently work in the media with me at ESPN.
Yes.
Dean used to work with us at ESPN. What is the role that we in the media should play with analytics?
I'm letting you go first on this.
Well, we should inform and entertain. Now, at ESPN we have to strike a careful balance. Like, we don't want to saddle our consumers with esoteric, abstract concepts that that they don't enjoy. But everybody's an armchair quarterback and coach, and so there's certain things we can do. We need to be careful to present them in digestible ways. Some things are push things, and some things are pull things. So we can have the more advanced stuff as pull content, meaning the consumer comes, visits the website, looks for, sees an article by Seth Walder, our colleague, and they know that that's going to interest them. And then other people can avoid Seth Walder if they like. And
who would want to avoid Seth?
I know, I was going to make a joke, but I won't. And congratulations, Seth, by the way. He just had a baby girl.
A leap day baby.
Leap day baby. So that's why he's not here. But and then there's push content, which is you're sitting in front of your TV on a Saturday afternoon watching, a college football game, and they say, ESPN Analytics recommends go for it or 3 yards to go or less. And that's okay. That's not off-putting to anybody. They don't need to do any math in their head. So there's a careful balance, and I've learned, I was kind of this, I was one side of the spectrum where like, just push as much as we can at the consumer, and that's the right thing to do because I'm one of those consumers that enjoys that kind of content. But I've learned that, there's a wide range of consumers, and we need to serve all of them.
Yeah, I had a lot of conversations about that when I was at ESPN with a lot of different people about what is our job, because we would get questions about, so why do you only cover Tom Brady and Peyton Manning? Why don't you talk about some of these other quarterbacks? And it's like there is an informed level, but there is also a feedback. I mean, that relationship between the media and who you are talking to is intricate. And if you talk about a second-tier quarterback and no one clicks on it, are you actually informing? And those are relevant questions, and I think we're not at the highest level, but you still have to wrestle with those questions because it is our content. We are trying to inform and entertain, and informing is educating a little bit too. But I think we've done a pretty decent job.
So when we talk about having, how we're presenting these analytics to our fans, how does that differ than how, you might present analytics to coaches, players, front office members?
The good thing about presenting to players is that in preparation for a game, their focus. So you can give them very focused things that they can work on. Coaching staff, it can be a little bit difficult because they are trying to think of everything. You brought it up too. Coaches have a lot to think about. And so you've got to get them the things that fit within the bandwidth that they have. I think media is so diverse. I mean, ESPN has how many channels and streaming concepts. There's ways to present this to a broad variety of people. I think in all cases, to some degree, it's easy to underestimate the intelligence of the audience. I think obviously this is a biased audience. We've got a lot of smart people here, but I think there are a lot of people who can understand things implicitly without you explaining them, explaining the concepts to them. So that's my perspective.
Fantastic. Well, I'm getting word that we were being extended for a few minutes. We're allowed to go over. I think, people are interested in what you guys have to say. And I've gotten a ton of questions from the audience that I certainly want to get to. We can hit a few audience questions and go back and before we conclude. Brian, this one probably for you. This is a good question.
Is it about Tyreek Hill?
It is not about Tyreek Hill. I don't see anything about Tyreek Hill here, but now you've just invited people to ask about Tyreek Hill.
10,000 questions. Hey, Burke.
Analytically, why do the Buffalo Bills underperform in the playoffs? Are they unlucky? Or does the data show that they really just aren't the better team?
I'm glad that's not for me.
No. Okay, I can answer this. They're unlucky. And not just like the ball bounces, their opponent's way in a way, but just the way their injuries unfolded, the time of year where they had their injuries, things like that. Their defense was banged up really badly. I think I don't remember all the details of their exit from the playoffs, but I think there was some wackiness, missed field goal at the end, right? If I'm remembering correctly. So that's pretty luck. That's very luck based. All of our metrics, we have our FPI. We have a new version of FPI that's being developed alongside our status quo, and both of those love the Bills. Thought the Bills were a very strong team, even when they were when their win-loss record didn't show it. We thought they were a very strong team. So I think they were very good, and somewhat unlucky.
So is FBI, you guys compare FBI predictions to Vegas at all?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How does it do?
It does very well. I mean, all of our power metrics do pretty well against Vegas among all of the quantitative models. So we're probably not gonna beat Vegas on a consistent basis, but of all the quantitative models out there, we are, including our basketball, college, pro, all that, it's consistently, there's a website that tracks all this. So however you want to measure performance, just accuracy, absolute error, squared error, whatever, however you want, against the spread, straight up, whatever, we're always like top 5 out of 30 or more year in, year out, which is exactly where you want to be.
That's good.
Do you think there are teams that focus too heavily on using analytics to manage the game?
Wizards. Oh, that was for Dean?
It's for either of you. You don't have to name specific teams if you want to call anybody out, but...
No, I frankly do not think so. I think you're trying to develop a culture of people asking the right questions and coming up with the right answer, but also it's a process. It's not necessarily a result. It is a good process, a process for making things more efficient and having more voices and getting to the right answer more often. So, no.
I'll have a cheeky answer to this question on the football side. All the teams are too invested in analytics. And let me explain. Analytics does not really contribute to the entertainment value of what's going on the field. It helps teams beat opponents who are less analytically savvy, and that creates an arms race. So it's a negative-sum game where you have to have a staff of 10 to 15 people. I know what I'm saying, Ben. I know. And so there needs to be like an arms limit. So you're spending $2, $3, $5 million a year on analytics staff, and so relative to the other teams in your leagues, you may have an edge, but globally, as a league as a whole, it's not. There are a few things. The fourth down thing is fun, man. That adds fun to the game. But outside of that, what is it really doing? They can identify who the better players are a little bit better than they could before, but now they all can, right? So now we're kind of back where we started. So in a strange way, analytics has created this negative-sum arms race among teams, which globally is probably a bad thing, but from an individual team's perspective, it's a good thing. So it's a strange paradox, but yeah. And you heard Rob Manfred, the commissioner of Major League Baseball, actually bring this up, and so we could see a salary cap for.
So that implies that it doesn't make the game better, and I think it does. I think it has, and I think the NBA has reflected that. I think they like the style of basketball now much, much better than it was in the 90s, for instance. The 90s basketball of isolation, hand checking, all of this kind of stuff. The game is better, and I would say that's not negative sum. I think the game is much more interesting right now. Everybody on the court can shoot, which makes defense really hard, but I think. Yeah, you're not giving enough credit to the fact that the game itself is better, and they're bringing in more dollars and everything.
I think it depends on the sport. Yeah. Like in baseball, with the shifts and the launch angle stuff, it's just become strikeouts and home runs, and no singles, no steals, no bunts. It legitimately made the game worse, and they're putting in rules now to undo a lot of that. Now, don't get me wrong.
And analytics will adapt to that,
and
presumably maximize, to some degree, maximize the winning potential out of that. And if that doesn't fit the style that people like, they do have to change the rules.
There's no reason that the analysis couldn't have said, "Oh no, you have to punt. You just punt on third down." Actually, it was a nice benefit that the analysis happened to recommend something that is more entertaining. But there's no reason why that has to be the case.
Brian, this one's for you. Get to play professor here. Why is it usually a good idea to go for it on 4th and short?
A combination of things is that the conversion rate is generally very high, and the value of punting is overrated. The value of longer field goal attempts is overrated. Some of the psychology behind the way coaches think in terms of, well, it was up to the offense to get that, convert that 3rd down. So it's off my shoulders. If the field goal kicker misses it, that's on him. It's not on me. So I think there's some psychology behind it. There's some I can't remember the name of the theory in economics where coaches or people, humans, kind of double the weight of an expected loss compared to an equivalent gain. What's that called? I don't know that theory.
Loss aversion?
Something like that, yeah. But there's a name for it in economic theory, and so there's some psychological reasons why they don't. When it's pretty clear they should, up and down the field, even on their own side of the field in most situations. Now, score and time play into that, of course, but that's generally why.
I think it's interesting to me that so much of analytics in football and analytics in basketball have basically said, you guys, like the top of the field, very aggressive people, you've been too cautious. We basically have told them to get more aggressive. Yeah. Not more like you guys have been so risk averse.
It's human nature. Yeah. So yeah, we're just like, sports is not, mortal combat, where, caution might, a little more cautious approach might make more sense. It's just a game, zero-sum game, purely zero-sum. And so, more aggression is the prescription. Prospect theory, by the way, I just remembered. Prospect theory. Yeah.
So this dovetails nicely into another question, talking about the importance of process over outcome, which I know you guys touched on earlier. How do we improve the public's acceptance of a bad outcome when the process is solid?
I think I hear it from some of the smartest people that I know too. In sports kind of makes people irrational at times, for sure. Like I have friends with PhDs who understand statistics and everything, and they will get on a player's case when they're doing the right thing and they just miss it. And they take an early wide open 3. Like, you can't take it that early in the shot clock. I'm like, well, you can. And I think it's a level of patience to convince people, because you talk about this with the 4th down thing, the difference between 54% versus 50% is very, very hard to see. And a lot of times, those are the advantages that you gain over a lot of period of time. And people, my friends who complain about this, they know it, but when you're in a game and you care about your team and they did something wrong, they didn't do something stupid, you have to say, no, that wasn't stupid, that was the right play. And like you bring up the Belichick thing, like, that is perfect. As soon as you said the date, I knew what date you were talking about.
I'm beginning to learn the way not to do it is to get into Twitter arguments with randos. That really hasn't helped. But one way to do it, so we're still talking about the Lions, right? They go for it on 4th down, lose the game. We're still talking about it. We're still talking about Bill Belichick in 2009. You remember those things. What you don't remember is the Bengals in week 9 kicked a field goal on 4th and 1 from the 28, went on to lose. The Vikings punted 4th and 1 from midfield, down 4, went on to lose. Like, I could fill, everyone's Twitter feed with counterexamples you will never remember. And I remember doing that one week because I think it was the Cowboys went for it, and one of our own analysts on air kind of blasted the decision, and they went on to lose. And I just listed just that week, all of the losing teams had 4th downs that they probably should have gone for it on, went on to lose anyway. So I think that can be educational, is just pointing those things out, because they're overlooked instantly, and nobody remembers nobody remembers any of those. They just evaporate away instantly. Yeah.
All right, so we've got just a couple minutes left here. So to wrap up, just wanted to get from both of you kind of something you've got cooking that you're working on now to expect later this year, and kind of what you're looking forward to most in the analytics space in the next several months.
I'm looking forward to Dean's new book, due out in August.
Yeah.
You have a title?
How much do I owe you? Yeah, Basketball Beyond Paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I'm certainly looking forward to that.
Yeah, we are all looking forward to it. If you have not read his first book, Basketball on Paper, now would be a great time to get that and be ready to go for the August release.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. There's a lot of work.
Brian, what else are you looking forward to, Brian?
We've been working. We've been revamping FPI. That'll be an adventure when that rolls out. I want to make sure that does well. But then beyond that, refocus on tracking metrics, and I'd like to build an analog to the receiver tracking metrics we talked about last year here, but for defensive backs. And it's a much harder problem because there's a distribution of blame and credit, which Dean knows a lot about. So that's next on my radar screen.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you, everybody. A lot of really good questions.